afternoon, John.
Good afternoon.
Happy to have you here. We are LocReady and happy to come back to Monterey here again.
Yes, I'm always happy to be back. It's pretty far back. Let's see. Starting off, my pathway started off in high school. My high school happened to offer 6 languages in high school. I was part of the International Baccalaureate program, which required me to take 4 years of a language. I chose Chinese in the end. Back then, it was not very popular to study Chinese. I just wanted to kind of do the language that nobody else wanted to do back then. Things have changed a lot now, but so I did the language nobody else wanted to do, and by the time I got to the end of my senior year of high school, I didn't quite know what to do, and so I just said, why don't I just continue studying Chinese? And I looked at the few universities in the US that had a Chinese program, studied that, then went off, lived in China for a while, came back, and then when I came back, I started working for what would be the equivalent of the consulate for Taiwan. And then I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and I thought, hey, maybe I'll go into translation, and I found MUIS and started studying at MUIS for a Chinese translation degree. And then in my second year here, I figured out I didn't really want to do translation anymore after studying Chinese for 14 years and found localization, and that's where I've been for the last 20 years. Well, I think the good news is that back when I graduated from here, there wasn't a big market still. There was no real market, especially for Chinese into English. There was almost no market still. So if you wanted to do that translation pair, back then, when I was doing it, it was very hard to find work in general. And you had to be a generalist. You had to specialize in everything to really find a lot of work. And you also might have to mix a little bit of interpreting along with translation to keep employed. The market obviously has grown a lot since then. You can become pretty hyper-specialized now in any of those, either Chinese English or English to Chinese. You can become pretty hyper-specialized and stay very busy most of the time. Weighing in on the trade relations side, I don't know. It's been interesting. I think the pendulum is always swinging back and forth. I think when I got out of here, things started improving in terms of relations, and now we're kind of sliding back into the old kind of new Cold War or whatever you want to call this. So I don't know. I'm not like the a lot of the people here who specialize in that kind of stuff, but it's certainly changing. Mm-hmm. The dynamic is changing. I don't think, however, based on experience, I know that even if there's conflict, that actually sometimes just increases the amount of work to be done rather than decreases. So, unless there's some really significant economic shifts, I'm pretty sure that everybody will stay pretty employed in those language combinations for a long time. Because even when people are angry at each other, they end up suing each other or getting mad at each other, and then they have to understand each other's communications, and then all that stuff has to be translated back and forth for each other to understand what's going on. And so that's why a lot of people say like localization or translation is always going to make money, like even in bad times, because when people get angry at each other, then they start to sue each other. What do they sue each other over? They sue each other for money. Where do they have to go? International courts. Then everybody has to read all the documents. Now you create all of this piles of documentation, which all has to be translated. So good times or bad times, there's always localization and translation work to do. Well, the Great Resignation is still going on. I guess the Great Resignation of 2021 has been really interesting to watch because I've never seen so many localization jobs posted in such a short period of time. It's crazy. I've never seen this. Every day, there's just like 3 more jobs that I'm like, what the heck? Like before, like especially right during COVID or right when it started. Yeah. Like there was nothing posted, and now it's clear that people are even having trouble filling jobs for everything from quality managers. I liked 3 posts today, 1 on a quality manager, 1 for a localization engineering position, and 1 for Amazon for some kind of senior product manager for a localization thing. I mean, I am not used to seeing this kind of just crazy opening of work in the localization field. That's so. The Great Resignation is interesting because obviously, a lot of people are getting up and leaving their positions and shifting into other positions. But the other interesting thing about localization is that it's kind of also what we would call a musical chairs. Like, you know, for each person who gets up and leaves a position, another person who's in localization will come in and fill it. So it's funny how that works. The company I just went, they didn't have any chairs in localization 6 months ago, and now they suddenly have a bunch of chairs. So I got up and sat in one of those chairs. Somebody's going to have to come in and fill my old chair. So that's an available job now that's sitting there waiting for somebody, and the postings are up and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Apply for everything. That's my answer. Here's the reason why. Because just because it says that it takes 7 years experience or something like that, when people are getting desperate and they need to fill that position, they're going to take who they think might be qualified for it, regardless of how many years experience you have or whether you meet all the qualifications. I tell students all the time, like, a job description is just a list of everything you possibly want out of that person. They do not expect you to check off every single box. So just apply to everything. Even if you feel like you're like only qualified for 50% of it, just apply anyway. You never know. They might interview you. They might think you seem like a really good fit. And they might think, hey, you know what? We've got people here who could train you and help you out and kind of get you on, you know, in the right direction. I mean, nobody ever writes up a job request with a list of stuff that they're like, it has to be this, and this, or else they're kicked out. So the hardest part, though, is you got to realize that there's robots out there, you know, choosing who gets chosen and not. So it's best to use your network to actually get to the people who have the positions open. Just apply. Always apply. There's nothing. There's no risk in just trying. And if you fail, you fail. You just keep on trying, right? Just apply to everything you feel like looks good to you. Whether you feel like you're qualified or not, just go for it. You know, there are some things that you're probably not going to be able to get, and there are some that it might be like, okay, this just isn't even worth my time to fill out because you have to fill out a whole long application or something. But generally, if you feel like, you know what, this is something I'm interested in and you want to apply for it, just apply. Just try. I think we're already here. I think we're already hit. I think we've hit wave 4 full on now. I think wave 4 is a whole different, you know, paradigm of working, obviously, with a lot of the work becoming now, you know, hybrid or remote. You know, I think there's been a real change in terms of so many things in the localization industry overall. It's not just technology, but, you know, the way in which, for example, sales processes are done are changing. The focuses are slightly changing about, you know, what people want to focus on and what they're, you know, I'd say that one of the main things I see, and this is getting really general, but the main thing I see is like a push towards where a lot of push was towards the power of the corporation to kind of dictate how its employees were going to work. We're starting to push back towards the employees starting to dictate on how the company should behave. And I see that's part of this wave 4, even in the localization vendor space, where traditionally that has not really been the case. So it's interesting. I think, you know, jobs are more competitive. I shouldn't say jobs are more competitive. It's the opposite. It's more like the companies are competing for talent, right, against each other, and so they have to really put their best foot forward as to who they are and what they're going to stand for. You know, I think in the past, a lot of LSPs especially didn't really have to state that they had any real stance on various things, and now they're kind of having to come forward and say, well, we have a corporate identity that we're going to do such and such for our employees, and we're going to do best by our employees. Whereas I think LSPs, if we move back, especially 2 waves back, like all the way back to second wave when I started, if you worked at an LSP, it was kind of just like, you know, just like slave driving, essentially. I mean, sometimes it felt like that. It was like you were being, you know, told, like, no, you will sit in your seat, you will do this, you will do that, you will shut up, you will do your work, like, don't do this, don't do that. LSPs used to kind of be very, like, task driven and kind of like, sit down, get your work done, you know. Yeah. And I think now LSPs are really starting to realize, like, that can't be the way they're going to move forward. They have to be more humanistic and really focus on their employee well-being. And I've seen that happen. I mean, I think that's a great change. I think it's a excellent change. And it's even happening on the client side too. I think even on the client side, it used to be a lot more like sit down, get your work done, and then things have modified or shifted a lot now. So I think that's a major change, and it becomes even more apparent here during COVID. Yeah, the sales dynamic has changed a lot. It's become a lot harder, I think, to sell in general. I think the sales side of it, they have it a lot harder than they used to because, relationships are still built up, I think, oftentimes with face-to-face interaction. And so it's really hard to sell in an environment where you're just a face on a Zoom call. It definitely complicates things, and it makes other factors become more important. So it's certainly complicating things. I know that sales teams, and it's not just in it's not just in localization. Sales teams all over the world in all industries are hoping that we're going to get back to in-person conferences and being able to visit customers on site and things like that, because it's just really hard to sell in an environment where you can't interact face-to-face with the potential buyers of your services. So, I know from that perspective, and it doesn't matter whether you're client side or vendor side in our industry, that's true, right? Whether you're an LSP selling to a Silicon Valley unicorn, or whether you're that Silicon Valley unicorn trying to sell your products to consumers or to businesses, B2B or B2C, it's the same problem. Like, sales is still a very person-driven business, and so it's very hard to make sales when you can't interact with people. So, especially in B2B. B2C less so, but B2B definitely. Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that the more we kind of the more COVID brought being international to the forefront, because it was like, well, we can't reach our domestic market, only and continue to survive, right? So a lot of people started looking international. Like, well, everybody's kind of in this thing together. How are we going to expand our market share? Again, it actually kind of comes back to the sales thing. It's like, normally maybe there's a company and they normally just do domestic sales, right? They do domestic sales, and they've always relied on a lot of personal relationships and meeting people and stuff to win a lot of business. Now suddenly COVID's here, everybody can't do that anymore, and they're like, well, we can only get so far with our domestic sales if we can't meet our customers in person. So what are we going to do now? Well, maybe we can start to do international sales to try to make up for that hole that's there. So I think there's been so much push into international this year, which also again leads to this whole thing of there being so many jobs being posted. Like, suddenly I'm seeing companies I've never even heard of or seen before. They're like postings for localization manager here and localization manager there, and I'm like, I never even heard of these companies before, but they're all just starting to just hire localization managers like crazy. Or positions, in-house linguists, which used to be a rarity, are now coming back again. Like, the whole idea of having in-house linguists in some of these companies is on client side is kind of coming back into fashion. Quality managers in-house, things like that. So that's something I haven't seen since probably before when you guys were still children. During the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust was the last time I saw them bringing that many people in-house to do localization. So there's been a real investment. Companies are really starting to invest in international. So like we said, it's not just the musical chairs of people moving around, it's that there's actually more chairs, right? So it's a crazy time to be in localization, honestly. It's nuts. I don't know where it's going to end, but hopefully positive. Hopefully it'll stay positive for a long time. Fingers crossed.